Hey guys.
Hello, Doug.
How's it going?
It's going okay.
Hey, John.
Howdy.
Clemens, while we have a minute, there was a question, where is it? On one of the Slack channels that I think was right up your alley. Hold on a minute. Here, let me get the link. Let me paste it to you in the Zoom chat. It was sort of a Kafka. It was kind of a Kafka question. I thought you might be the best one to answer that one.
That is possible. I'll find it.
It's in basically there's the Cloud Events channel, the main one. Okay. Let's see. Where was I going?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Why are you doing that to me? Hey, Ahmed, welcome. Oh, he has no microphone yet. Hey, Hao.
Hello.
I can't remember where Ahmed is from, which company.
Just a head up, next week is Canada Day, so both me and Lou will be off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lou and Hao. Holiday next week. Okay. Got it. Okay, David, you there?
Yes, good morning.
Hey, how's it going? I think Ahmed is having issues with his microphone. All right. Hey, Tommy. Yo. Hey, Eric.
Hi, Doug.
Hey, Ahmed, you got your microphone.
Yes, hi.
Hey, welcome to the call.
Thanks.
You do work for Red Hat now, right? I just want to make sure I got the company
correct.
right. That's what I thought. Yeah, that's what, okay.
Correct.
Just double checking.
I dealt with it, Doug.
Oh, cool. Thank you, sir.
I think I did. We'll see.
Yeah. I hope Klaus shows up because he's on the agenda.
I do too. And he talked about that yesterday, I think so.
And there he is.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, no, his ears were burning. Hey, Klaus. Klaus, you there? Maybe not. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Doug.
How's it going? It's been a while.
I know. Too many meetings showing up.
Yeah. I thought maybe you're just on vacation a lot.
I wish.
You know, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but because of you, every single time I think about a dad joke, I think of you. I don't know why. Especially with Father's Day recently, I kept hearing a whole bunch of dad jokes, and I kept thinking of you every single time. Like,
I don't know if that's good or bad. Huh.
I know. It's just, it's out there.
We have a Slack channel that's called Dad Jokes.
Is that internal to the company or is that just external?
Yeah.
Yes. Unique kind of perspective on things. Hey, Daniel.
Hello.
Hey. Wow, small group today. So, Klaus, you there yet?
Yes, you know.
All right.
I'm sorry, I had to switch my headset first. So.
Not a problem. Just want to make sure you're going to show up since you're on the agenda. All right, one more minute, then we'll get started. We are losing people left and right here.
Hey.
Who was that?
Remy.
Oh, Remy. Actually, I feel like I'm missing some. No, I guess that is everybody. Okay, well, it's 3 after. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's see. Just a reminder, Clemens, you got some AIs out there. Community time. Okay, anything from the community that people want to bring up that's not on the agenda? Okay, reminder, we do have an SDK call right after this one. As of right now, I believe there's nothing on the agenda. So if you have something, please add it. Otherwise, we will adjourn the call really quickly. Nothing to report from the Discovery Interop, the call that we had last week because we didn't really have one. I believe that the, what's the word I'm looking for? The registration for KubeCon has opened up. Just to let people know, I think I saw a note go flying by about that if you're interested in registering. I have not heard yet about, actually, I take that back. I was going to say I hadn't heard anything about our sessions, but that's not true. I just remembered. I did get a note asking if we wanted to do a session or, what kind of sessions you want to do. And of course, as usual, we get 2 possibilities, one for cloud events and one for the serverless working group. What do people think? In the past couple of times, we usually hand over the serverless one to the workflow folks because they don't get a speaking slot or a guaranteed speaking slot, I should say. And typically we only need one time slot anyway. So I was thinking about doing the same thing here again. Does anybody have any other opinion on this? Anybody think, no, we actually need 2 slots for some reason? Okay, not hearing anything. Give working group to workflow. CE has its own. Okay, whoop. Cool. Okay, I'll talk to Timur about that and make sure he wants to grab it. I'm pretty sure he would. Okay, we don't have anybody from workflow to talk about their status, so let's go ahead and jump into PRs and stuff. I guess, okay, any other topics people want to bring up or any other issues people want to bring up before we jump into PRs? We just have 2 things to discuss, and then we can jump down to the presentation section. Okay, so on last week's call, I took the action item to create a PR for 666, just to refresh people's, I'm sorry, 667, refresh people's memory. This person, what was their name? Eric, noticed that in our sampling extension, we never actually say what the attribute name is. So what I did is I created a simple PR that renamed values to attributes and just said sample rate is the name. Any questions or concerns about that? Okay.
No.
Nope. Any objection to approving? Easy. All right. Next up, new person to the group, Ahmed. Ahmed, would you like to briefly talk to this one? Just introduce it.
Yeah, it's a simple pull request. I was just reading and the Cloud Event SQL expression specs, and I did some language review and changed some terminologies to more used ones. Like, for example, usually they're called binary functions instead of functions with arity 2 or something like that. So check it out, and it's a simple pull request.
Yep. Okay. I did look it over last night and it looked good to me. I don't believe that any semantic changes were introduced by mistake. I think it's strictly syntactical in nature. Does anybody need more time to review it? It's not terribly long, but it's not just a one-liner either. Anybody have any questions, comments, want more review time?
I had the same impression as you.
I'm sorry, say it again, Eric?
I had the same impression as you.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Not hearing anything. Any objection then to approving? All right. Cool. Easy.
So Doug, can we go back to your previous one?
Surely.
And can you expand out expand both up and down?
Expand up and down. I'm not sure what you mean by expand up and down.
Show a larger diff.
Oh,
All right. So here's my quandary on this one. The extension is named sampled dash rate. It talks about sampling extension. If you look at the text below integer, there's a thing called rate. And at the bottom, it says the rate must be greater than 0. So this implies to me that the name was intended to be rate, although, you know, you named it sample rate, and the name of the extension is sampled dash rate. So I'm confused as to what the name should actually be.
okay. We have 3 options then. Does anybody have a preference? I mean, I think rate might be a little bit too terse. I'm inclined to rename the file to be sample rate to match this and change this here to be sample rate as well. But Mark, did you have a different opinion?
I don't know that I had a different opinion. I was just noting the differences that were occurring within this file, and felt that we need to make sure that it's all consistent.
No, it's a good eye. It's a good catch. What do other people think? Anybody want to voice an opinion? Eric, your thumbs up is to which? Go with sample rate in all 3 spots?
I thought it's a good observance, and we should, yeah, sample rate seems fine, and we should be consistent.
Okay.
Do we know who was the original author of this extension?
Let's see. extensions, sample rates, history. Thomas, from ages ago.
Oh,
Yeah. You can take a look at what the version looked like back then. Sampling extension, sampling rate. Yeah, it's basically the same thing. So I think you're probably right. He probably meant for the rate to be the word there.
Sorry, I've only just caught up with what's going on. In the C# SDK, which went GA last week, we expect the extension attribute to be called sampled rate, all lowercase.
Okay, let's go back. So what you're suggesting is this be sampled rate.
Yes.
And
yeah, it's probably reasonable for us to change that to sample rate. I'm struggling now to work out why I thought it would be sampled rate, other than it was probably that in a previous version of the SDK, which may well have been wrong.
Just at the bottom of the file, there was, or at least in the earlier version, there was mentioned sample rate.
Well, I don't know anybody. Well, I personally don't have a strong opinion either way. I think they all are valid choices. If you've already have running code that's shipped called sampled rate, I don't see any reason to force you to try to change.
Agree.
Yeah. So does anybody have a problem with using sampled rate here? The title of the doc, just be consistent, remove the dash, and down here, and I'll look for other occurrences of the word rate all by itself where it may be more appropriate to use sampled rate instead of just the word rate.
sounds good to me.
Okay, anybody have any different opinion or objection to doing that? Okay, let me make a note here, otherwise I
Thank you
will
very much,
forget.
folks.
Yep, approved with suggested edits. That's a good catch though, Mark. And thank you, John, for speaking up about that.
I'm glad that that my kids weren't 5 minutes later, otherwise I'd have been too late to catch it.
That is true. Okay, and while we're here, let's do John there. Okay. All right, so that one's done. Just to double check, any other comments, questions on Ahmed's PR? Okay. Anything about these issues or PRs down here that people want to bring up? Otherwise, we'll skip it and go straight to the presentation stuff. Okay, in that case, we'll skip it. So on last week's call, John egged us into doing presentations because we all like doing that. And I decided I'd volunteer for the first one. Let me stop sharing this and share something different here. Share. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I was going to briefly talk about sort of the high level vision in terms of how all the new specs we're working on come together, since we do have some new folks on the call who may not understand it all or be familiar with it. So, oops. Okay, so we have the idea of events, consumers, and producers. And ideally, in the cloud events world, we say, okay, great, the producer is going to send a cloud event to the consumer. But that's kind of the tail end of the flow. Before that can happen, typically the consumer has to discover the producer that they want to subscribe to. And that's where our discovery spec is going to come into play, right? So what they're going to do is talk to, excuse me, a discovery endpoint to find out what producers are available, what events each one actually produces, and the mechanism by which they can then do the subscribe, as well as other additional metadata, things like what kind of filtering mechanisms might be available, stuff like that. Okay, what transport's available for doing the event delivery, you know, all the things that I think most people have seen one time or another in our discovery spec. Okay, so again, the consumer is going to use the discovery endpoint, meaning the discovery spec, to discover which producer they want to get events from. Once they do that, then they actually do the subscription itself. And that's where the subscription spec comes into play. Now, the subscription spec isn't trying to reinvent the wheel here. If for the particular protocol that you're trying to talk over, there already is a subscription mechanism, then I believe the subscription spec basically says, go use it. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel. If we have to add any clarifications or any other bits around that, we will. But if everything is already defined by whatever mechanism is out there, then we just basically point to it. However, if the mechanism is not defined, for example, there isn't a standard yet for HTTP to how to do a subscription, then we will define that mechanism in there. And the user can then, or the consumer can then use that mechanism to do the subscribe to tell the producer, hey, I'm interested in the events. Now, the mechanism by which the events get delivered then obviously is through a cloud event, but whether it's a push or pull, obviously is going to depend on the subscription itself, right? If it's doing something like Kafka, then it's going to be a pull type of thing. Doing HTTP, it's more like a webhook or push kind of a thing. So then we'll use our normal webhook specification that we've already defined as part of the cloud event spec. Okay. There is one more spec at play here, but I'll get to that in a sec. But for the discovery and subscription, are there any questions about that? Okay. Before I jump to the schema spec, and there's one other thing I want to say. Obviously,
Sorry,
there
I was
are.
trying to talk, and
Oh yeah,
I was
go
on
ahead.
mute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I recently also went through the subscription API, and I was wondering if there were discussions about the event schema and the event schema registry with something like a sync API, for example.
So hold that question, because the next thing I was going to talk about is the schema registry.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
It was a great lead-in question, but let's hold off on that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions about discovery or subscription? Okay, I do want to say though that related to these two specs, we do have a sort of what I call ancillary specifications, like the CE SQL language specification for a possible filter language. We also have the pagination spec for when you want to do discovery and pull back a ton of data coming back, a whole bunch of services. If you want to do pagination, the pagination spec is a proposal for how to make that look so we get some consistency. Okay, so those are ancillary specs. They're secondary to the.
And is the pagination spec intended to be just for discovery, or is the idea that as we produce specs for multiple services, they would all use the same pagination thing? I think I noted in one of the other PRs that pagination was kind of on its own, feeling a bit orphaned.
Yes, it is meant to be a generic specification with its first purpose being discovery, but yeah, it was written to try to be generic.
Right.
Yep. And so obviously if we made a mistake and there's something that needs to be in a generic spec, even if discovery doesn't need it, then we should consider adding it.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Now to the schema registry. Now, obviously Clemens, speak up here if I get this wrong, but schema registry is basically trying to standardize the idea of how to share schemas, right? So from a schema producer, for lack of a better phrase, perspective, we're trying to standardize the APIs by which you can store your schema into a schema registry, right? So just define the put type of operations. Obviously, from a consumer point of view, there isn't a whole lot there, even though we do talk about it. There's a get. We do talk about the pattern, or I should say the URL pattern that we are trying to standardize for how to get, for example, different versions of the schema, how the schema groups may be represented in the schema URL pattern, those kind of things. But it's really a very basic spec that just tried to standardize these simple operations around uploading schema to a registry and then downloading the schema itself. Okay, and Ahmed, I'll get to or we'll talk about your question next, but does that make sense so far to people? And Clemens, did I skip anything?
No, that is correct. And the reason why we need this is we want to have it in the same networking context and API context as the rest of the APIs, so that if someone who's producing events can also publish the schema that goes along with the event, and reversely, someone who's consuming events can also get from the same endpoint the schemas that are necessary to even decode the payload of the events. And that's why we have that in here. And there's also a propagation mechanism, a replication mechanism that allows to replicate schemas along the flow path.
Yeah, thank you. And I should have mentioned the cloud event itself has the option to point to a schema, which is another reason why it's linked in all here. Yep. Okay, so Ahmed, you want to repeat your question since I think it applies now?
Yeah, I was wondering if there were discussions about what's most appropriate for event schema, if there's a preference for something open API versus async API, and how would you, if you have discussed anything in this working group around it.
Clement, you want to take that one? Because I want to say that I don't think we've talked about that, but maybe you've had some thoughts on that.
Sorry, I didn't listen for a second.
All right, can you repeat the question just one more time?
Yeah. If there were discussions specifically evaluating open API versus async API, which claims to be more events oriented schema?
So there is what we do here is we use open API just to define the REST API. Async API has a different function. Async API is effectively a mechanism to define flows that go through message-oriented middleware. And it is, in relation to cloud events, it's a discussion we haven't really had yet. I have talked to Fran Mendes about this briefly earlier in the year. It is such that async API is suitable to orchestrate flows of cloud events, but that's kind of the intersection point. But async API maps to various transports, and cloud events as a framework that also maps to transports would kind of fit in there. And yes, there is a notion of schemas in async API. But what we have here is a way it's much lighter weight. Like you don't need to have this full contract that is really about also encompassing the metadata and encompassing the flow. But really, these schemas here are really meant for the payload, because there is a number of encodings, specifically protobuf, where you just can't do anything with the message unless you have the schema, which means you need to have a way to communicate the schema. So this is really not meant to be the big this big frameworky thing like async API is, but a super lightweight mechanism that simply allows you to decipher a message that you got and to get the schema somewhere near you. I hope that helps.
So I'm just wondering what exactly were you referring to about a discussion that this working group did not have yet? Was it about whether or not you wanted to go into that detail about providing a schema for the whole event flows in cloud
No,
events?
we don't. We have so the cloud events group has so far no interest in doing that.
Yeah.
And async API, in my understanding, is all about that. So I think there's synergy potential for those two efforts, but we haven't explored that in detail yet. And that is, and the reason for why we haven't done that yet is because async API has only become a Linux Foundation project about 2 months ago, and before it has been impossible for companies like Microsoft and some others to even engage in async API because the legal framework has not existed to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the schema registry? Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a following question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Does this also cover the case when a consumer is potentially a producer, like when a function might respond with an event, and like this is the case, for example, that we have sometimes in Knative in the spec we have scenarios covering when the subscriber would also respond with an event and how to deal with that?
So we drew a pretty tough line in the sand at the beginning of cloud events and said we don't want to do correlation because we want to cover the smallest agreeable set of properties that we can express for something that is an event, which is a capture of facts. So we have a broad set, we have pretty tight definitions of what that means. And as soon as you get into request response patterns, as soon as you get into reply correlation, you are opening a box of the Pandora's box of very many conflicting patterns where we think that interoperability at the level where we want it would be more difficult. So we might go there in some way by doing specs that are layered on top effectively as extensions, but we haven't done that yet. And there were long and extended discussions around this and whether we should do correlation. But really, events as we define them is a pub-sub mechanism where you have a publisher and the publisher is decoupled from its subscribers, and so therefore there's no notion of destination. And since there's no notion of destination, there's also no notion of a return destination. We basically delegate that entirely to the transport infrastructure.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Ahmed?
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you, Clemens. Okay. Any other questions? All right. In that case, that is it from my side. So now, Klaus, would you like to share something?
Yes.
Okay.
So, first time on that new machine. Let's see if everything works, especially as I'm really new to the Mac environment. So will only take a few. I haven't shared with Zoom yet, so I have to.
Oh, that's right. You got to enable it through the
Yeah,
security
yeah.
thing. Yeah. If you have to drop and come back in, go ahead. Sometimes you have to do that.
I don't think so, but I just had. It just takes a few seconds.
Okay. Take your time. We're actually way ahead of schedule. Oh, looks like he had to drop. Okay, we'll give him a sec. Here we go. Klaus, you're on mute if you're talking. Klaus, you there?
Yes, it's
there
just
we go.
that the Zoom window was disappeared once I started sharing. So that was a bit distracting. Okay. Sorry for that, but I hope you can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so it was, I think one of the questions was about the purpose of Cloud Events discovery of all the specs, basically. So as this one is about discovery, I start with that. I suppose it's mostly self-explanatory that what discovery is about, but still, so the major purpose is that consumers should be able to find out, so first of all, what they can subscribe to. I mean, that's really discovery. So what event sources are there, and maybe also what event types, but also how they can subscribe. So where is the according subscription endpoint, what filter dialects are supported, and finally also how to consume. So which protocols, for example, are used. And so there's, first of all, that this is maybe also the reason why there is this combined primer document for discovery and subscription. You see already here that there is a close relation between the two. There might also be, at this point, a certain relation possible to async API. That was at least my thinking, because of this link also to the protocols and so on. So once we would start formulating all kinds of details about how events are delivered, maybe there's also some idea, some room for integrating with async API here. I don't know. That's just some brainstorming. Okay, so, but in addition to consumers, there's also other cases. Intermediaries replicate discovery information. I think that's also a case I've been discussing with Clemens quite a bit over the past weeks. And also producers might register what events they provide, so they announce them maybe. And for this, there's also a management API defined. So the resource model of that API, of the discovery service, there have been quite a few discussions about a year ago. I today took some time to check again the discussions we had on GitHub and the remaining issues. So where we landed for the time being is that we have a single resource, the service. And I tried to mark up the different sections I see in there in that resource. So the first part is this service metadata, describing the service overall. So how it's identified, maybe some of the details I come to later. Then the subscription information would be the next section. And finally, then an array of events that service provides. And so there I already, so I also, by the way, mentioned in that slide an issue where some of those things are discussed. So that this is, you could regard this as a denormalized view, as different aspects are put into a single resource. Just as a notion, I mean, you could have event types as a separate resource somehow defined, and then have references, or I think we sometimes also had versions of this with even 3 different resources, but there were all kinds of discussions. And so that again might be one topic for future discussions, if there could be also relation to what I here have listed as static catalogs. I found on GitHub, for example, some more or less static list of events available from Google or things like this. And yeah, in addition, the subscription information is specific not really to the service, but to yeah, the subscription endpoint. And that, if you look at models where discovery data is replicated across multiple hops, that might change for each of the hops. So that's something where I still see some room for improvement, and at least some food for future discussions. So service, I took the liberty and just copied the definition of service from the spec document. So we arrived at that notion of service because we realized that source is quite, there can be a high number of sources. So as we usually like to use the GitHub example, and there a source might be a repository or a pull request, you can imagine that there would be a lot, and it wouldn't make sense to list all of them in discovery. So that's why we somehow landed with this notion of service to group sources. There have also been quite a few discussions around this terminology. So that's what I mentioned here also. Source, producer, sometimes we also had then additionally, in addition, the term provider. We were confusing, I think, different meanings of producer, and there were quite some discussions. And in the end, we reached some consensus of just using the term service. At least I think there have even been multiple issues around this, but here's at least the link to the number 620. And for me, service is still a bit unclear. So I of course have to map it to our own infrastructures. And here I just wonder what that means for all the different cloud architectures and tenancy models you see out there. Sometimes you have regions, availability zones, clusters, namespaces, or services and service instances. You have tenants. And so in extreme cases, like for example, cases I actually see on our side is that each tenant of a service even has different events by configuration or extension. And so I just wonder how exactly we will in the end map this to this notion of service we have so far in this discovery standard. In theory, you could come up with a lot of more complex ideas here, but of course simplicity is also a nice thing, and maybe a lot of aspects should be kept out of the core specification. There could be ideas of having something like inheritance mechanism or something like this. You have a service class, you could say, and then services could be instances of this, but maybe it's really better to keep it clean and simple in those aspects than out of this specification. Just